praise. And I am truly blessed. The Bible says that your gifts will allow you to be among the company of great men. And here I am, right before the bishop. Bishop Jackson, how are you?
I am doing wonderful, and thank you for the compliment. And I hope you're in the company of a great person, but I feel honored to be in your company to be able to do this interview. The 132nd bishop. I am the last of the bishops elected, and I tease my colleagues that they are blessed because they're all in between Richard Allen and me.
And there are some great shoes to actually fill.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Right.
So I'm greatly honored to be among the bishops of the church, and thank God for the I ran a couple of times, so being elected really was a tremendous thrill. In fact, every now and then I pull out the DVD just to look at it again, because now I can look at it, relax, and actually enjoy it. But during the election itself, it was very tense, and waiting to see what the outcome would be. I knew it was the last time that I would actually be able to run. And so I'm thankful the election turned out well, and I'm glad for the opportunity to serve the church. Yes, districts 14 to 20 have the largest geographical district that comprises Malawi, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and Uganda. The first 100 days really was extremely busy. First of all, I was blessed to be able to continue pastoring until November. St. Matthew Church, not far from here in Orange, New Jersey. But I also was invited to go and preach and do workshops at several of the Episcopal districts in the United States. The 1st District, the 2nd District, the 4th District, and the 5th District, so it kept me really busy. And then I had to prepare in July to go and hold my first annual conferences in Malawi and in Zimbabwe. So it was a very busy time, but it was actually a rewarding time. It gave me a chance to really see what being a bishop is all about. It also gave me an opportunity to learn firsthand, learning while doing. I learned several things. One of the first things I learned, which is really beneficial to me, and that is from my perspective, a bishop is still a pastor. You become the chief pastor of that district, and so as a pastor I wanted the people to know that I cared for them, and so as a bishop I wanted the pastors and the members of churches to know that their bishop is a good shepherd who cares for the sheep. And so putting that in place, actually going to Malawi, I was first stunned. I knew Malawi was a poor country, but I did not know what is poor. But one of the most rewarding experiences of my life was to see the resiliency and the faithfulness of the people in Malawi. My first conference, about 400 people came. In Malawi, 90% of the people do not have electricity or running water in their places, but you would never know their poverty by the way they... My entire 31 years at St. Matthew was a mother who called me, and she actually cussed me out.
Really?
Yeah, she cussed me. She wanted to know what in the H are y'all doing at that church, where my boy never wants to come home, wants to spend all of his black time at that church. And yet when I left St. Matthew Church, that same woman was one of my students. And I discovered if you get the kids, you'll get their parents. Because when the parents see that you take an interest in their children, you'll get them. And so that was the most rewarding part. And unfortunately, one thing that let me know I was getting old, I was starting to marry the children of kids who weren't born when I was there. It was a wonderful experience. It was a wonderful experience.
It is great, I guess, to see it.
You know, the worship in Africa is really amazing. I was absolutely blessed by their worship. For example, in Malawi, Zimbabwe, Tanzania, for example, the people never sing without dancing. And there is such joy in the worship experience that you become caught up with it. And some places I did not speak the language they provided for me translators, but even not understanding the language, you could still feel the spirit and the fervor and the genuineness of their worship. I'm a fervent supporter of missions, and being in a district which really needs mission work, the missionaries and the people there themselves are also committed to missions and helping others. In fact, we've adopted a theme in the 20th district for this quadrennium, last in number, but first in spirit and service. The 20th district is the last district in the church, but it's my hope that we will in fact be first, that nobody will surpass us in our commitment to both service and ministry.
Okay, take it back. When did you first love the Lord?
You know, the Lord came into my life. I was 11 years old, and I will never forget. Well, you know, I was really moved because it showed me really tremendous difference between, say, us here in the States and many of them in Africa. For example, in Africa, many of them would walk 4 or 5 miles, some of them barefooted, to get to church. When I was leaving the first night of the conference, I asked my driver, I said, what hotel are they sleeping in? And he said, Bishop, some of them are going to sleep in the church, and others brought their blankets and cots, and they will sleep outside. And I was stunned, but the next morning when I arrived at conference, they were up, they were fresh, they were clean, and they were ready for worship and business. And it struck me that here in the United States, many of us, our worship and our commitment is really based on convenience. You know, it's either too hot or it's too cold, it's too far to walk. But in Africa, it's not based on their convenience. It's really based on their love and their commitment to God.
One of the biggest charges in your ministry is you have a great deal, huge level of actual missionary that spreads out through the other countries.
The Lord came into my life. I was 11 years old, and I will never forget. I was so moved that I went home that afternoon. I was determined to read the Bible all in one day until I got to about the 4th chapter of Genesis. I saw all those long names which I could not pronounce. So reading the Bible in one day disappeared quickly. But my love for God actually grew, and it has grown consistently. I want to do all that I can. 1, to live for Christ, and 2, to be like Christ.
So, when did you
People laugh when I tell them because the reality is I did not want to be a minister. I had two grandmothers who used to always tell me you're going to be a preacher. And I would actually get upset because I did not want to be a preacher. I wanted to be a lawyer. And I looked at all the law shows, Perry Mason, Burke's Law, Judge for the Defense. Every law show I looked at, and I envisioned myself sitting in a paneled office, a big law firm. And I did not want to be a preacher. All the preachers that I knew wore black suits, black shoes, drove black cars, and went over to the members' houses and ate up all their food. So I did not want to be a preacher. But towards my senior year in high school, I found myself being drawn to ministry. And so sometimes on some Sunday mornings now I find myself looking in the mirror and laughing because I have on a black suit, I have on black shoes, and I have a black car. The only thing which has changed is the members now don't invite the preachers to their house to eat up the food. That's what happened.
Okay, so your first church.
My first church was actually in my senior year of college. Bishop Hickman, one of the ministers, retired, and Bishop Hickman asked me to go to a place in Greenwood, Delaware. That's what happened.
Okay, so your first church.
My first church was actually in my senior year of college. Bishop Hickman, one of the ministers, retired, and Bishop Hickman asked me to go to a place in Greenwood, Delaware, Graham AME Church, which is my first church. I served there for a year before I left to go to seminary in Atlanta. But I loved that little church. They were the most wonderful people. And every now and then, when I'm in my home state of Delaware, I would just take a drive down to Greenwood, Delaware, just to drive past the place. It was a wonderful experience, one that I'll never forget.
And then your next appointment?
When I was in Atlanta at seminary, one of the ministers got sick, and I was asked to go supply a place. It was called St. John AME Church, 1158 Coleman Street in Atlanta.
And then your next appointment?
When I was in Atlanta at seminary, one of the ministers got sick, and I was asked to go supply a place. It was called St. John AME Church, 1158 Coleman Street in Atlanta. And I was there for a year until I graduated from seminary. Again, another wonderful, warm congregation. They had this young preacher in seminary, a student. They took good care of me, and I tried to serve them as best I could. And I still remember to this day, they served the best food anywhere in the world. I went to Atlanta slim and skinny. As I prepared to leave, I put on some weight and was expanding. I wouldn't consider it fast. I'm a firm believer that you do your work where you are, and your upper mobility will take care of itself. In fact, I will be forever eternally grateful to Bishop Richard Allen Hildebrand. He provided the money for me to go to seminary in Atlanta. And when I got out of seminary, in fact, I said to Bishop Hildebrand, I had no sense whatsoever. But I said to Bishop Hildebrand, Bishop, when I get out of school, please do not send me to New York. I'm from Delaware, Royal Place, and I'd be scared and petrified in New York. And so Bishop Hildebrand sent me to Jersey City, New Jersey, right next
to New York.
And every morning I woke up, I saw the New York City skyline. And I said to him, I said, Bishop, I asked you not to send me to New York. He smiled and said, I didn't, but I got you as close as I could. But I stayed there for 2 years. And then he moved me and sent me to St. Matthew in Orange. And I will never forget what he said. And I say this now to other preachers. He said, Reggie, I'm not going to give you a break, but I want you to make your break. He said, this place has tremendous potential. And if you do your work, you can make this a great church. And true to what he said, St. Matthew was a small church, again with some absolutely wonderful people, some of the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life. And they gave me the opportunity to serve them and grew to allow me to be the leader to them. And St. Matthew has become a tremendous church. And I was honored to serve there as a pastor for 31 years. And it's ironic because when I got there, the average age of the congregation was about 67. And I'll never get there was a lady, and she did not mean any harm, but she said, she was honest. She said, we're disappointed. So we asked her to send us a scholarly teacher. And he sent us
Teaching tool. Teachable moment here. For future pastors, future bishops, and future elders, when you have this wonderful record of success in every place that you've gone, it seems to increase. What do you recommend, or what are some certain points that you can give to others to help them on their way?
Well, first of all, I was fortunate. There were really two mentors who really shaped and molded me. One was my father in ministry, Reverend Rudolph W. Coleman at Mount Zion Church in Dover, and the second one I went to seminary in Atlanta for the Reverend Julius C. Williams and Pastor Flipper Temple AME Church. Both of them really took me under their wings and mentored me, and they were fabulous pastors, and I learned an awful lot from them. But again, I would also advise pastors in particular, just because you get the appointment does not mean you are the pastor. You may have the title, but you are not yet the pastor. You don't become the pastor until the people get a chance to know you and are ready to follow your lead. And to follow your lead, they've got to feel like they can trust you and have confidence in you. And most times, that may take a couple of years. So I advise anybody, when you go to a church, get to know the people. And also let the people have a chance to know you. And be yourself, be the same outside the pulpit as you are in the pulpit. Be the real you. And once people get to know you, then they'll be ready to follow you. And that has served me very well at St. Matthew Church. When I arrived, again, the same lady said to me, we're disappointed you're young enough to be our grandson. How are you going to lead us? And I view that as the Lord speaking to me through her. And so for 2 years, I was really like their grandson. I was 26. The average age was 67. I would just go to their houses, sit down, have conversations with them about their family, about the history of the church, their experience in the church. I would talk to them about my vision for the church, what I thought the church could do, and a real bonding and network took place. And really about 2 years, I had them, and they were willing to follow my leadership. Sometimes they may not have seen where I was going, but they were willing to follow. And so every pastor's report I gave at the annual conference, because they were willing to work with me. I did not title it the pastor's report. I always titled it the report of pastor and people, because the pastor didn't do anything by him or herself.
Amen. Amen.
Well, particularly as it relates to Africa, there's several absolutely tremendous challenges in Africa. Africa is a place with absolutely tremendous possibility. The challenge before Africa is, one is the issue of poverty. In some parts, South Africa does well financially, but in Central and West Africa, most of those nations, the issue of poverty is tremendous. The second issue, the issue of education. Education is desperately needed in Africa. So my thrust during the time I've been there is really to try to provide some education and training for both the ministers and the lay people. You know, education is a great equalizer. And I tell the people in Africa often, the only difference between you and the folk in the United States is they've had the opportunity that you haven't had. And so my task and my challenge is to try to provide the opportunity for them to get an education so that they can best be their best selves and do their best.
Wow. See,
Many of us in the United States are not aware of how absolutely fortunate we are. In Africa, most of the people in Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Uganda, most of them, their highest level of education may be high school, and not beyond that. And so most of the ministers in 20th district, the most education they have is high school. And so we're really starting almost at ground level trying to bring them up. Fortunately, they are interested in
working with.
Well, one of the things I'm trying to do is get some help and resources from the United States to provide in Africa, and also in some instances when I can. There's some people I find who have tremendous natural potential and possibility. I'm trying to find a way to bring them to the States to get an education, but in doing that, I'm also requiring them to commit themselves that they're going to return to Africa to serve. It's not going to help Africa if they come to the States to get an education and then stay in the States. I want them to come to the States to get a good education and go back and serve the people in their country. And so as much as I can, I'm trying to find an opportunity for them.
Okay, great. So now the goals for the district stateside.
Well, stateside, I'm a firm believer that our number one priority has got to be church growth. I'm a firm believer in that. I am concerned that far too many of our churches are not growing. And so I believe we have to train our pastors and in fact our laity in terms So many of our people are not growing because they do not have Christian education provided to them. You know, I never forget when I pastored St. Matthew, there was a man who joined the church, and this man was really overjoyed. He was committed. I mean, he was just fascinated and happy to be a part. And he came to me and said, "Pastor, you know, I'm so happy to be in this church. And I want to do what I can to help the church, and I want to know if I can sponsor a trip down to the casino." And I looked at him, and yet, you know, and I said to some of the officers, you have to understand, the mindset he had in the world is the mindset he brought to the church. And it's the church's responsibility to teach and train so he can change his mindset. And I remind people today, you're not going to change the way you live, and you're not going to change the way you act until you change the way you think. And Christian education is to help us to change the way we think. So Christian education is critically important. And if people are not getting it over here, they're going to find some other place where they can get it, because people really do want to grow. So church growth and Christian education, I think, have to be our first two priorities. And I think our third priority has really got to be the issue of social justice and social action. God wants the church to be the change agent in the world. And I'm very concerned for right now in the United States, there is so much injustice being done, and some of the issues which the church ought to be addressing that we are not addressing. And all you hear are the voices of, I hear people talk about the Christian right. Does that mean everybody else is wrong? And I tell people, we live in an age of conflicting voices. And so when I look at so much of the injustice, the issue, for example, of income inequality, is problematic in the United States where 1% of the population owns 40% of the wealth. And then in the richest nation in the world, 20% of the population, almost 50 million people, are living in poverty. And those are issues that the church ought to address. Well, I think not only with the AME church, but I think with what we call the black church over the last 25 years, there has been a lessening of that, and which really concerns me. In fact, last Sunday I preached in Baltimore, and one of the things that I talked about was the fact that there is a praise that turns God off. We're just caught up in the praise, and God is worthy to be praised. But sometimes we need to go back and read what he says to the prophet Amos. He says, tell them, I despise your feast days. I do not savor your sacred assemblies. Though you offer me burnt offerings and sacrificial offerings, I will not accept them. I have no regard for your fat and peace offerings. Take away from me the noise of your songs, for I will not hear the melody of your stringed instruments, but let justice run down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. We are in the praise. Praise is not only what you say with your lips. And I remind you again here, Jesus. This people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And so genuine praise is when what you say is followed up by what you do.
Amen.
And it must be a combination of both.
Amen. So pastors, should they actually be mindful of time frames and time constraints to actually deliver the service? I mean, I've noticed that some theatrical production.
Well, I'm going to say this. First of all, I'm concerned because too much of what we do now is more entertainment than worship. So
There we go.
That's my first concern. But second thing is, I think genuine worship flows according to the moving of the Spirit. And so I'm not too much concerned with how long it is. In fact, in my mind, it's not how long it is, but it's how you make it long. We do a lot of things in worship, don't even need to be in worship. And so I think if worship is genuine, then it's going to be decent and in order.
Right.
Some worship which is genuine may be short. Some worship which is genuine may be long. But again, I think it's a matter of how the Spirit moves. And I'm not sure any of us can effectively manipulate how the Spirit moves. And that's why I think, the books sometimes tell us to test the spirits.
Let me bring that in.
Okay.
All right. So Bishop Jackson, you're writing books.
Yes, I'm in the process of writing 2 books. One of them is based on a series of sermons I preached, 5 or 6 years ago, entitled 7 D's plus 1. And the second book is going to be entitled What's in Your Hand, The Potential.
Difficult time to pastor, to preach,
Well, let me just say, I really started kind of what you might call the, I won't say the latter end of the civil rights movement, because I think the civil rights movement is still continuing. But the period where me and my contemporary, the pastor, I think has been a tremendously challenging time, because in a lot of people's minds, they feel like we've arrived, and so they no longer since the civil rights movement. And they moved on, for example, in 1998, here in New Jersey, we had a shooting on New Jersey Turnpike,
Right.
which really resulted in a tremendous struggle to end racial profiling. And black preachers in the state took the lead on that, and I'm very pleased because today New Jersey is still the only state in the nation that has a law that says racial profiling is a crime. So that was something we were able to accomplish, and we were together. The challenge, if you talk about in terms of civil rights, I believe the greatest civil rights issue of the 21st century is education. Many of our children of color, fail to get a good education. In fact, almost 50% of African American kids drop out of school and don't finish with a high school education. Others graduate, get diplomas, but do not have an education because the quality of their education is inferior, say, to their peers and counterparts in other parts of the country. And so when you talk about why unemployment, even with the recession behind us, unemployment in the black community is still going to remain twice the national average because far too many of our kids don't have the education or the skills for the job in the 21st century. And too many blacks don't view education as a civil rights issue. And so therefore, that's not something you can bring us together because some of us have been blessed to get a good education, have a good job, and live out in the suburbs. We don't sense the urgency or the necessity to join with those who still live in the inner cities where the schools are failing our children, to fight for them to get as good an education as we got. And so it's almost as if with blacks who were able to move out, we feel like we've arrived, and that's not my issue. And I think that's something which is going to come to haunt the African American community for years to come. Today, when the correction system tries to figure out how many new prison cells they have to build, they look at fourth grade reading schools. And it's no accident that most of those in our prisons look like me. We're into the civil rights movement because I think the civil rights movement is still continuing.
Yeah.
But the period where me and my contemporaries have passed, I think, has been a tremendously challenging time because in a lot of people's minds, they feel like we've arrived. And so they no longer sense a civil rights movement. And they moved on, for example, in 1998, here in New Jersey, we had a shooting on New Jersey Turnpike,
Right.
which really resulted in a tremendous struggle to end racial profiling. And black preachers in the state took the lead on that, and I'm very pleased because today New Jersey is still the only state in the nation that has a law that says racial profiling is a crime. So that was something we were able to accomplish, and we were together. The challenge, if you talk about in terms of civil rights, I believe the greatest civil rights issue of the 21st century is education. Many of our children of color, fail to get a good education. In fact, almost 50% of African American kids drop out of school and don't finish with a high school education. Others graduate, get diplomas, but do not have an education because the quality of their education is inferior, say, to their peers and counterparts in other parts of the country. And so when you talk about why unemployment, even with the recession behind us, unemployment in the black community is still going to remain twice the national average because far too many of our kids don't have the education or the skills for the job in the 21st century. And too many blacks don't view education as a civil rights issue. And so therefore, that's not something you can bring us together because some of us have been blessed to get a good education, have a good job, and live out in the suburbs. We don't sense the urgency or the necessity to join with those who still live in the inner cities where the schools are failing our children, to fight for them to get as good an education as we got. And so it's almost as if with blacks who were able to move out, we feel like we've arrived, and that's not my issue. And I think that's something which is going to come to haunt the African American community for years to come. Today, when the correction system tries to figure out how many new prison cells they have to build, they look at fourth grade reading scores. And it's no accident people like me. Two school systems are absolutely not equal. In fact, one of the things in 1954 Brown versus Board of Education case, I'm astounded because people miss or they misinterpret that movement. The Supreme Court ordered separate but unequal to be done away with. These are the words they use: with all deliberate speed. Stop and think on that word deliberate. And we've made deliberate not to mean fast. We mean deliberate to mean slow. Because the fact of the matter is, in the very city we're sitting in now, Newark is one of the most segregated school systems in the entire country.
Oh, yeah.
Most of these urban cities are still segregated school systems. So as long as you have blacks in the inner city, those in the suburbs not really no complaint about that. But you let blacks start going to school out in the suburbs, and let those in the suburbs start going to school in the cities. That's when you have a crisis on your hands. Well, you know, when I mentioned about the social justice issue, listen to what is being said in this country. The minimum wage, for example, in most states is like under $8. The president has proposed increasing the minimum wage. The hue and cry of those on the far right is they are vehemently opposed to it. And it is absolutely astounding to me that over the last, say, 15 years, in terms of corporate executives, their salaries have increased by over 200, 300%. The worker on the bottom, their salary has hardly increased at all. And yet, a lot of people see no problem with that. And that ought to be an alarm to us. When you look at, say, even the tax rates in this country, corporate executives who make hundreds of thousands, not millions of dollars a year, their tax rate is lower than that, say, of their secretary.
Right.
There's something wrong with that, but there's no hue and cry to change that. Yet, if you listen to some in this country, most of those who are unemployed is because they don't want to work. Most of those who are low income is because they don't want to do better. In fact, when Ronald Reagan ran for president, Ronald Reagan talked about the welfare queen. And we actually made that a real person. There was no person, no individual that he was talking about. It's something that he made up in his mind, and we made it real. Yet, there are a whole lot of corporate welfare kings and queens.
Yeah.
We don't talk about that.
Yeah. Funny how we can give billions to other countries, and it's called foreign aid, but the fact of giving a few hundred million for our own citizens is considered welfare?
That's correct. Oh, I mean, it's, you know, there are so many disparities that are not spoken to. In fact, I'll even come back. Use a different issue. Take the issue of immigration. Immigration was not a problem, and nobody was opposed when they were Europeans. But now we're talking about people of color all of a sudden.
There's a problem with
It's a major
immigration.
problem. And the real problem with immigration in this country is, for example, with President Obama, and you heard this comment, we want our country back. What they're not saying directly is, for a long time, this country had been run by whites, particularly white males.
Mm-hmm.
Within the next 15 to 20 years, this country will no longer be predominantly white. It will be predominantly people of color.
Right.
And that has some portions of this population, they are alarmed, and that's why we got to cut off immigration. We got to stop all the people of color from coming here. We want our, and our refers to white Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Wait a minute. We also have to rewrite the voting qualifications and the
That's
laws
correct.
to get in.
Too many of us vote.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's look at it and let's talk numbers. There's not a politician alive that does not know that to become a sitting president, you need the black vote.
Oh, absolutely.
Or the vote of color.
Absolutely. Or you can change that if you get less of us to vote.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So the big alarm now is because a lot of people are kind of like the dinosaur looking at the comet.
Well, put it this way, in the 2012 election, there's some portions of this country who were just determined that the incumbent president would not be reelected, and they knew he was going to be defeated.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were going to say was, the 2008 election, we made a mistake. It was an aberration. But we corrected it in 2012.
Mm.
They did not expect blacks and Hispanics and young people to turn out in the numbers they turned out in 2012.
Right.
But they were shocked because they turned out again in huge numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And the man they thought they were going to defeat, was going to be defeated,
Mm-hmm.
got reelected.
Mm.
They could not say 2008 was a mistake
Mm-hmm.
because he got elected twice.
Right.
And so you notice immediately after the 2012 election, you have like 19 states coming out, we're going to change the laws.
That's right.
You got to have this ID, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this. It became that going, we're going to make sure that they don't turn out in those kind of numbers anymore.
Mm.
Because when blacks and Hispanics and them turn out in those kind of numbers, they defeat any other group alone. So that's what this is all about.
Right.
It's about making sure we don't do this again.
Right. Right. Trying to actually close the floodgate now that it's open.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's a little difficult.
Under the guise of voter fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And there is no evidence at all of voter fraud.
Right. In fact, the evidence showed that there was more foul play
On the other side. That's correct.
In fact, the evidence showed that there was more foul play
On the other side. That's correct. That is correct. But unfortunately, a lot of our people don't read the newspaper or don't look at the news. Many people in our community really are not aware of what's going on that's affecting them. That's why, again, the pastor, and you need to read the scripture, the pastor becomes that watchman.
Okay.
You are the watchman
Right.
on the wall.
Right.
And the pastor, that preacher, is the one who has to be both priestly and prophetic
Mm-hmm.
to speak to the people about what's going on around us.
My people
If
perish.
they don't get it from you, who are they going to
Get
get
it from,
That's
right.
correct. Even when you read the Lord's, hear Jesus in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus summarizes it well. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth. That's what our challenge is. To see that God's will
Yes.
is done on earth
Right.
as it is in heaven.
Amen.
one of the things which I just gave my secretary a minute ago, I got the Council of Bishops at our meeting in Nashville to designate September 14th as Let's Get Ready to Vote Sunday. And we're going to ask every pastor in every church on that Sunday to preach about, one, our responsibility as citizens to vote. Our responsibility also as Christians, exercise our responsibility to vote. And also provided talking points on issues and things which our people need to know in order to be able to cast an intelligent vote. And so we reached out to the AME Zion, the CME, the National Baptist, Progressive Baptist, all of the major black denominations to join in this effort on September 14th. So I'm hoping they will respond, because so it was critically important in 2010 when control of the House of Representatives changed hands. It was because only about less than 40% of blacks across the country voted. Blacks have a tendency of not voting in off-year elections,
Right.
Or in midterm elections, and so our hope is to really have a large turnout in this year's election. You know, for example, not speaking partisan, but the fact of the matter is, and I don't think most people realize, but if the control of the United States Senate changes in November, that is really the end of this presidency.
Definitely. Yes.
Because Congress will be controlled, both chambers, by the other party.
Right.
And they're already opposed to everything he does. And so if they control the Congress, his presidency, for all practical circumstances.
Exactly.
The first major thing which occurred was the passing of the Affordable Care Act.
Here we go.
Which, 40 million Americans without insurance. Most of them African Americans, Hispanics, and poor.
Correct.
All right. They were, and when you saw on television all these town hall meetings, people screaming and hollering, these are all people who got health insurance. There were people who are uninsured,
Right.
Who got insurance,
Right.
but don't think the others ought to have insurance.
Right.
All right. Or they say we ought to pay for it. Well, the fact of the matter is, foolishly, they've already paying for it. But if you don't have health care, go to the emergency room, you're paying for it on the back end and
That's
paying
right.
more.
That's right.
So that was the first thing. The second thing which brought all this about is, and I wrote a column which I sent to the Christian Reporter yesterday, entitled "How Soon We Forget." We forget that when Barack Obama became president, the automobile, the banking, and the housing industry and financial markets were all about to go under.
Yes, they were.
Okay. Unemployment, we were losing 75,000 jobs every month. And we were involved in 2 wars. And we had the highest national debt we've had in God knows when.
Right.
He had more on his plate than any president except Abraham Lincoln and Franklin Roosevelt. Okay. Now, and really, I place much of the blame for this is the defeat of the president, because they have the biggest microphone in the country, which I think they're not using effectively. Because look at what we have today: the banking, the housing, the automobile, the financial markets are stronger than they've ever been. Nobody hears about that.
No.
The financial stimulus bill that he got through Congress with only one Republican vote, that has led to the creation of over 5,600,000 and some private sector jobs.
Correct.
Which is 1 million and more jobs than were lost on the entire Bush recession.
Somewhere close to 1.2 million.
That's correct.
In entrepreneurship and business ownerships.
And again, you never hear. They don't talk. I don't know why this administration does not talk about its successes. The Affordable Care Act, they said it was going to increase health care costs and people are going to lose jobs. The fact of the matter, the record is, it's increasing jobs and reducing the cost of health care. Health care costs last year declined by like 9%. But they don't talk about that. You see, and my thing is, why? But there's other, for example,
CNN.
Yes. No, but CNN,
CNN, they talk highly about it.
No, but what happens is, you have CNN and the other NBC, CBS, ABC. Number one, it's not their job to be this administration's spokespeople. But my thing is, even the president, when he travels around the country, even now, with them talking about we're going to sue you and all, one of the things he would like to the American people, he needs to say, you know, how soon we do forget. Let me remind you that before I became president, and somebody from the other party sat in this office. Let me remind you where the automobile, the housing, remind you all the way. Let's look about where, because when I hear them talking about everything that's wrong, I never hear them talk about what's right.
Right.
And could it be because they're the one who got us in the mess, but don't want to give us credit
For getting us out. Right.
See, and that's not only something the president, but why doesn't the members of his party across the country talk about that? Yeah, or even when I see ads on television, why don't they talk about that? You see, why don't they have the executive leadership of the automobile industry come talk about where they are now compared to where they were? Have a town hall meeting, invite the heads of GM, Chrysler, Ford, have them with the president at a town hall meeting. And let's say, can you tell us where you are now compared to where you were?